I used to think I would be notified out of habit if nothing else. There had been no invitation, not even the courtesy of forgetting to copy me on an email. I saw the photo by accident. It was forwarded by a friend who assumed I'd been there. Hallie sat at the center of the long oak table, her posture precise, hair pulled back in that tight, effortless way she favored during press events. Daniel stood just behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder. Behind them, a frosted panel read, "Internal Transition Meeting, Whitman Legacy Foundation." I looked at it longer than I meant to, not because of the words, but because of the space where someone should have been standing. The family always took photos in odd numbers. Richard believed it looked more natural. The next morning, I took the old elevator up to the plaza. I told myself I was only passing by, but I had placed my keys and my old foundation badge in my purse the night before, as if some part of me already knew. The building hadn't changed. The floor tiles still bore faint scuff marks near the revolving door, and the smell of carpet cleaner clung to the corners like a memory someone kept trying to erase. What had changed was the plaque. Brushed brass. New bolts, new title. The Whitman Legacy Foundation Executive Director, Hallie B. Whitman. I stood still for a long time. I don't remember adjusting my scarf, but my fingers were already at my neck, tightening it slightly, like I needed proof that I hadn't turned invisible. I took out my badge. The plastic had yellowed at the edges. The magnetic strip was scratched. I pressed it to the scanner. The red light blinked. Again. Then again. The sound of small, uncertain footsteps. A young receptionist, maybe mid-20s, stepped around the desk. Her voice was soft. "Can I help you?" I told her I used to work here. Her smile stayed polite, but her eyes darted to the monitor. "I'm not seeing your name in the current system." "Were you part of the operations team?" I didn't answer. My gaze drifted to the open binder on the front desk. It was the gala program draft. Thick paper gold lettering page marked with a pink post-it. I flipped it open. Richard's face filled the page, smiling turned slightly to the left, as if acknowledging someone just outside the frame. Only there was no one. No sleeve of a jacket touching his. No suggestion of another person having stood there at all. I remembered the original photo. I had been on that left side. That smile wasn't just for the camera. As I left the building, the sidewalk felt steeper than I remembered. My shoes tapped unevenly. I wasn't rushing, but something in my spine had leaned forward, like the body sensed something the mind refused to name. The phone rang. Hallie's name. Nothing else. I didn't hesitate to answer. Not because I expected apology. Hallie didn't speak in apologies, but because I knew she wouldn't call unless it was for effect. Her voice was steady, punctuated. "You don't need to come by again, Rachel. It's all been settled. You should take time to rest. Somewhere else." There was a silence not on the line, but inside my skull, like someone had suddenly turned off the sound of everything except her words. Then the call ended. No explanation, no space for questions. Back home, I placed my badge on the kitchen counter. It left a faint imprint in the dust I hadn't noticed before. I stared at the faint rectangle and didn't brush it away. I opened the drawer where we used to keep foundation documents folder tabs, labeled in Richard's handwriting. The tabs were still there, but the folders had been thinned out. The one marked Founding Agreements had only one page left. A scanned copy with new letterhead. I read the first paragraph twice. The Whitman Legacy Foundation was established by Richard Whitman and his appointed successors in the spirit of ongoing stewardship. The word appointed stood out like it had been underlined. I hadn't been appointed. I had been there. At the bottom of the drawer was a small envelope, old and soft around the corners. I recognized the writing immediately, Richard's shorthand. Inside was the first donor list from our second year. My name was in the header beside his handwritten. I pressed my thumb to it gently, like I could still leave heat behind. Later, I sat in the living room. The chair still creaked in the same spot. The lamp beside it had a burn mark where Daniel had knocked it over as a boy. It hadn't been fixed, just turned slightly so no one could see the damage. The mug I used every morning had a faint crack along the rim now. I turned it so the crack faced the window. I didn't cry. That wasn't what this was. Some losses are too quiet to cry over. They just echo. And when they echo long enough, you start learning how to stop listening. I finished my tea cold. I didn't call anyone. I didn't write a response. The phone sat on the table, still, silent. So was I. And that was the only answer I chose to give. I used to believe that steadiness was the most valuable thing I had to offer. When Richard began to slow, I stopped finishing my sentences. I let him drift in and out of conversations without anchoring him back. His hands shook when he poured tea, so I began preparing it before he noticed. There were no announcements. No changes made official. Just less of me in every room. Daniel stepped in gradually. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. I started forwarding board minutes to his email. Hallie began replying in his name, copying me only when necessary. It makes sense, she said, flipping through a folder at the kitchen table one night. You've done this long enough. Let Daniel try. Her hand rested on the table near mine, but not touching. Her nails were pale and clean. You've built something strong. It's time to let the next generation stabilize it. The word stabilize stayed with me, as if I had been balancing things on instinct alone, and now, at last, a firm hand could bring order. I nodded once. That was the whole conversation. I moved Richard's papers into 3 labeled binders and set them on the top shelf of Daniel's study. His name was on the door now, printed neatly on a gold plaque Hallie ordered without comment. I didn't remove Richard's handwriting from the file labels. I simply placed them behind closed glass. The guest room became mine the day Hallie brought home a whiteboard. Daniel needs a proper office if he's going to manage things. You don't mind moving downstairs, right? It's quieter for you anyway. The word quieter had weight in her mouth. Not a suggestion, a reclassification. I carried my folded sweaters down myself, using a basket lined with a pillowcase from our old summer cabin. That night, I unpacked my toiletries into the lower bathroom cabinet, between a spare plunger and an unopened box of children's Band-Aids. At dinner, I asked Hallie if she'd eaten. She poured herself water and said I had something earlier. Don't worry about me. The placemat beneath her glass had a damp ring that stayed after she lifted it. I didn't wipe it away. I learned to rinse my own dishes quietly. I waited for the dishwasher to be full before running it. I made space. I made silence. Even in the hospital, I stayed out of the way. When Richard was moved into the private room, Daniel signed the form. Hallie arranged for the delivery of pillows from home. I arrived with an old blanket I'd kept from his first office. It smelled faintly of cedar and starch. The nurse said only 2 could stay overnight. Hallie turned to me by the elevator. Bags under everyone's eyes won't help. You're better off going home and getting rest. I waited until the doors closed before I allowed my hand to drop from the call button. The day of the memorial, they asked me to arrive 15 minutes after the guests. Just easier logistically, Hallie explained. We've got press checking in, and Daniel needs to greet the trustees. I wore a navy dress with a high collar, the zipper stuck halfway. I didn't call for help. At the service, the first row was already filled. Hallie gestured to a chair behind a marble column. You'll be more comfortable back here. It's a better view of the slideshow. I listened as Daniel thanked the board for shaping the vision of the foundation alongside our father. There was no mention of who had edited those vision statements, or who stayed up with Richard while he dictated them on napkins and notepads, too tired to type. A woman I didn't recognize turned to me after the service. "You must be the aunt." I nodded. It didn't feel like a lie. Not in that moment. The ring on my finger had begun to turn inward during the ceremony, pressing the metal into the soft groove near the bone. I didn't adjust it. The ache helped me stay still. Later in the parking garage, Hallie caught up to me near the stairwell. "I hope today wasn't too much. We did what we thought was best for everyone." I looked at her blouse. No wrinkle, no stray thread. She noticed the silence and added, "You were always the one to keep things grounded." "That's your strength, isn't it?" I watched her walk back to the elevator. Her heels didn't echo. At home, I found a grocery list Richard had written on the back of an envelope, Apple's baking soda. "Those crackers you like." The handwriting was slanted rushed. The envelope had never been mailed. I put it back inside the drawer beneath the placemats. In the weeks that followed, I accepted what was offered. Daniel transferred my access to the shared accounts. "It's just a formality," he explained, handing me a pen. He didn't watch as I signed. Neither did I. The check I received in the mail didn't come with a note. Only the words, "disbursement for transitional expenses." Not a thank you. Not even a line acknowledging the decades I had filed, traveled, arranged, and rewritten. Just an amount. Enough to imply closure. Not enough to claim it. I never told anyone how I shredded the envelope, not out of anger, but because I didn't want to keep anything that sounded like a transaction. The next time Hallie passed me in the hallway, she paused only for a moment. "You've always been so discreet. It's honestly admirable." Then she smiled, the kind of smile people give when they've erased you cleanly. I remember standing there after she left, not moving, not needing to. Some things once removed don't leave a mark, but some things do. I don't know when people stopped saying my name out loud. There's a drawer in the hallway that still sticks slightly when pulled. Richard used to say it was the house, reminding us it had its own rhythm. That's where I've always kept cards, birthdays, holidays, notes folded into quiet shapes. Some years there are too many to stack. Some years fit in the palm of one hand. The most recent Christmas card was printed on glossy paper. A scripted line across the top read, "Wishing you warmth from the family of Daniel and Hallie Whitman." Nothing handwritten, no ink. No room left on the card for even a first name. I turned it over, hoping for something, an afterthought, maybe a dash, a scribbled "love you." There was nothing but a barcode from the print shop. The card before that was from New Year's. Same font, same template. I don't know when the signatures stopped. Farther down the stack, beneath older envelopes that still smelled faintly of glue, I found one from Richard. The envelope was cream-colored soft at the edges. His handwriting was unmistakable, tilted slightly with uneven spacing. Inside, he'd written, "You're the root. No one sees it, but everything grows from you. No date, no occasion, just that." I folded it again and placed it back, not at the top, but 3 cards down. I wanted to touch it without always finding it first. The fridge now only holds magnets that Hallie approved, things shaped like vegetables, or quotes about efficiency. Mine are gone. The one that held up Daniel's first spelling test disappeared sometime last winter. There used to be a note Richard wrote in permanent marker stuck to the inside of the pantry door. It said, "If you're hungry, don't just stare. Do something." Hallie called it visual clutter and painted over it when we had the kitchen redone. I didn't argue. I just stopped opening the door without needing something. When Grace won the state speech competition, I was in the 4th row behind a pillar. I clapped when everyone clapped. I smiled when her name was called. She wore the blue blazer I bought her last spring, though no one remembered that part. After the ceremony, a reporter asked Hallie if talent ran in the family. She adjusted Grace's hair for the camera and said, "She's a Brooks through and through. You can hear it in the way she holds a sentence." I nodded. No one looked in my direction. The following week, a neighbor dropped off a copy of the local paper. The headline read, "3 Generations of Wit." Only 2 names were mentioned. When I received an email from the alumni office at the university, I didn't expect much. They were organizing a small ceremony to honor contributors who had supported community literacy programs over the decades. I had written the proposal for the first reading room in town. Richard delivered the speech. I managed the grants. Daniel responded to my invitation with a short message. "Hallie's not feeling great. Probably best we sit this one out." "You get it right," I didn't reply. That night I ironed a blouse that had lost its shape years ago. The collar wouldn't lie flat. I wore it anyway. At the reception, someone introduced me as a longtime volunteer. I smiled and corrected nothing. On the drive home, I stopped at a gas station and bought a cup of coffee that burned the inside of my lip. I drank it slowly anyway. I left the cup on the passenger seat overnight. In the morning, the ring it left on the leather seat looked like a mistake someone else would blame me for. There's a coat hanging in the back of the hall closet. It's wool, slightly frayed around the cuffs. I wore it to nearly every board meeting for 10 years. Once Richard said it made me look like I belonged in rooms no one else remembered to thank. I pulled it out last week. There was a torn receipt in the pocket, faded to gray. Total, $3.45 item. Lemon muffins. Note for R, they're back in stock. There was no signature, just that one initial. The handwriting didn't belong to Richard. It wasn't mine either. I don't know who left it, but someone once bought me something small without being asked. That was enough to keep the receipt. There was a dinner once just after Grace turned 12. We sat around the table with candles Hallie brought back from a trip. She called it a celebration of trajectory. Daniel made a toast. He held his glass slightly higher than usual and looked around the room like a man who was proud of his curation. "To the future of the family name," he said. The word family floated for a second too long. No one looked at me when they drank. Hallie reached for the bread basket and brushed past my plate. "Could you pass that to me?" "Not Mom, not Rachel. Just you." I passed it without speaking. After they left the table, I stayed to clear the dishes. The linen napkin on my lap had a small tear near the edge. I folded it carefully, hiding the flaw. I found my name last in the RSVP list for that evening's seating plan typed as +1R. Whitman confirmed. I hadn't brought a guest. I stood by the window later, long after they went to bed, and watched the porch light flicker. No one changed the bulb. Somewhere in the house, the dishwasher hummed. In another room, the television played on low volume. The mug on the counter had my lipstick faintly along the rim. I rinsed it twice. When I looked at the family portrait hanging in the front hallway, I noticed it had been updated. Richard was there. Daniel, Hallie, Grace. I was not. No frame had broken. No argument had taken place. No door had slammed. But the picture had changed. And sometimes that's louder than anything spoken. I didn't know how strange my own name could look until it showed up with an extra A. The envelope was heavier than usual thick stock with the firm's embossed logo in the corner. My first thought was that it was a courtesy update, something routine, maybe dull. Legal language has a way of hiding cuts in clean lines. I opened it at the kitchen counter, the same place I used to clip Richard's travel itineraries to the corkboard. The countertop had a small chip near the sink that I stopped seeing years ago. I ran my finger over it while I read. The letter began with a heading I didn't recognize: Whitman Legacy Foundation Adjustment to Trustee Structure. Beneath that, a paragraph full of polished sentences, somewhere in the middle, reflects the ongoing leadership transition under the guidance of Hallie Brooks Whitman. And farther down, the founding contribution is now formally attributed to Richard Whitman and his designated successor. My name wasn't mentioned, not even in the fine print. A paperclip held a second document, one I had written 30 years earlier, now reformatted with new margins and a different logo. Where the signature lines used to be, Hallie's name had replaced mine. A sticky note was attached. For your records. The corner of the note was creased, like someone had hesitated before pressing it down. I stared at that fold longer than the rest of the page. At the bank, the manager avoided eye contact. Her scarf was tied too tight around her neck. I remembered when she used to wear silver pins shaped like books. I handed her the file. She scanned it, her fingers pausing slightly at the login screen. I'm afraid this account has been restructured. I said nothing. She scrolled. Do you still see my name anywhere in the system? She clicked once more, her screen tilted toward the window reflecting the early glare. No, ma'am, it doesn't appear so. She printed something and slid it across the desk. I didn't pick it up. I left the file folder on the passenger seat for 2 days before bringing it inside. At home, I unlocked the cabinet in Richard's study. The key still stuck slightly to the left before turning. Inside, the first ledger sat on top, bound in green linen. My handwriting was beside his on the first entry. Date, March 3, 1992, amount 12. $700 memo. Initial seed gift from joint account. Confirmed. The ink had faded to a soft gray, but the shape of the words hadn't changed. My R still curled slightly at the top, like it always had when I wrote in a rush. I closed the book without rereading. The television downstairs played something with a canned laugh track. Hallie's voice drifted up the stairs. It's just an update. These things happen. Most people wouldn't even notice. She wasn't talking to me. She never was, even when I was in the room. That night, Daniel walked in with a printed packet in hand, the kind with the black spiral spine that presses awkward lines into your palm. It's cleaner this way. The board prefers clarity. He placed it on the table without sitting down. I'm sure you'd agree. The early records were informal. There was a lot of overlap. This simplifies things. He left before I responded. The spiral pressed a faint curve into the tablecloth. I flipped through the packet once he was gone. It listed every major donor, every revised policy, every name now considered integral to the Foundation's vision. Mine was not there. The chair I was sitting in had a loose thread along the cushion's edge. I pulled it gently, then tucked the end underneath. Richard once said the first thing that makes a person feel real is being written down. He wrote everything. Receipts, travel notes, shopping lists with odd abbreviations only I could read. There had been a sticky note once on the back of a recipe card where he'd scribbled, "Don't let the ones who arrive later rewrite the beginning." I had laughed when I read it. He was always suspicious of clean revisions. The card was gone now, somewhere in a drawer that had been emptied for streamlining. One morning, I received a thank you letter, typed. Generic. The Foundation is grateful for the legacy you supported. Your contributions remain part of our broader history. No signature, no date. Just a stamped logo in gold foil and the scent of new toner. I folded it once, then again. Not to save, just to keep my hands busy. Daniel later stood at the end of the hallway with a folder in one hand and his phone in the other. We're drafting the formal public statement. Hallie thinks it's best if we focus forward. He hesitated before adding, There's no benefit to revisiting structure. The optics aren't good. I didn't speak. He adjusted his cuff. The shirt looked like one I bought him years ago, though I doubted he remembered. I know this isn't personal." He walked away before I could decide whether to agree. That evening, I sat in the chair by the fireplace, the one with the stain under the cushion from when Grace spilled grape juice. No one had ever been able to scrub it out. The folder with the new charter rested on my lap. I didn't open it. There's a point when absence becomes so absolute, it starts to look intentional. That was the first time I understood erasure not as an accident, but as a decision made quietly with good grammar and firm signatures. I didn't shred the letter. I didn't burn it. I didn't call anyone. I placed it in the drawer beside the checkbook I no longer used under a stack of warranties for appliances I didn't choose. And I left it there. Because sometimes what you don't contest says more than any written correction ever could. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't tell Hallie. There was nothing to explain. I started with the books. Not the ones on display, but the ones behind the others. Spines, cracked pages, underlined tiny slips of paper, still tucked into chapters I once thought worth returning to. Some still held the faint scent of sandalwood oil from when Richard insisted on keeping sachets in the back panels of the shelves. I wrapped each volume in newspaper. The rustle of the pages was the only sound in the room. I used the classifieds section, the obituaries, anything with a face or a date. Somehow, it felt right that stories would be packed inside other stories. The key to Richard's desk was still in the ceramic bowl shaped like a leaf. I had stopped reaching for it long ago. That morning, I slipped it into a white envelope and wrote 3 words in uneven script: "Return to file." No name, no greeting. I placed it on top of the leather-bound handbook I had written years ago, the one with margin notes in pencil where deadlines changed and budgets grew. The cover still bore the pressure mark from Richard's coffee mug, faint but permanent. I didn't shred it. I didn't take it with me. I simply stopped needing it. Later that day, Daniel passed me in the hallway. His voice came just before he turned the corner. "Are you done with the den? Hallie wants it for her conference setup." I nodded. He didn't wait for a reply. The boxes were already sealed by then. Nothing labeled. I didn't want anyone opening them later, pretending to sort through things with concern. At one point, Hallie glanced at the stack near the door. She didn't ask. She only mentioned offhand, "Storage units are expensive. We won't cover anything outside the core household." I kept folding clothes into a soft duffel I hadn't used since the last trip Richard and I took together. Some of the sleeves still smelled like cedar. Others were just fabric, now worn thin in places no one else would notice. I left the coat I usually wore hanging near the door. It looked like I'd be back soon. That was intentional. Not for them, just for myself. The illusion of routine softens the shape of an exit. There was a photo in the hallway framed in brass. A family shot taken years ago. Thanksgiving, I think. Everyone was laughing. My hand was cropped out of the frame, but I remembered resting it gently on the back of Richard's chair. I didn't take it down. Some things are better left untouched, so no one can accuse you of making a scene. Joan from the front office texted once. "I noticed you haven't signed the new board register. Everything okay?" I didn't answer. Later, she sent another. "Hallie says you're taking a step back. Just checking." I read it twice, then deleted it. Words like taking a step back make it sound as if there's a mutual rhythm to absence. There wasn't. I didn't lock the door behind me. That was deliberate. Daniel once told me during a tax review, if there's no resistance, the transition looks clean. No mess. That's what we want. That line came back to me as I walked down the path lined with hedges I had planted 20 years earlier. Clean, no mess. I had placed the ring Richard gave me on the windowsill the night before, not because it meant less now, but because I didn't want them to ask where it was later. I didn't want Hallie holding it between her fingers like a relic, saying, "It's pretty, but not quite my style." At breakfast, before anyone else was up, I made a single cup of coffee. I let it sit until the film gathered on top. I poured it out without drinking. There had been a time when Hallie used to joke, "You're the only one who still brews it like it's sacred." She hadn't said that in years. I doubt she noticed I stopped offering her a cup. The night before I left, I opened the drawer beside the bed. Inside was a notepad with 2 to-do lists I had written weeks apart. The first was for the Foundation's spring gala. The second had only 4 items. Clean desk, confirm, address, change. Cancel standing orders. Pack quietly. I folded the paper and tucked it into my coat pocket, the same coat I left behind. At one point, Daniel came to the door. His voice was flat rehearsed. "If you're feeling overwhelmed, maybe it's best you take some personal time. There's no shame in that." He looked past me when he spoke, as if checking the hallway for something more pressing. Then after a pause, Hallie says the board is aligned. Everyone agrees. It's unanimous. He stood there waiting. I reached for a folder and handed it to him. It held the old office access cards and 2 keys. He took it without comment. When I stepped outside, the wind had shifted. A neighbor's wind chime clicked faintly, 3 notes, repeating like a forgotten song. No one asked where I was going. No one offered to help carry anything. The car started on the first try. I let it idle for a minute longer than necessary, then I turned it off. I wasn't ready to drive yet. There's a particular kind of silence that follows you when you leave without slamming the door. It's not empty, it's final. Some people hear it and assume nothing happened. That's the beauty of it. What they don't hear is what lasts the longest. I didn't bring much. A ceramic teapot wrapped in an old scarf, 3 worn books with my initials penciled on the inside cover, and a sweater that still held the faint scent of cedar from Richard's closet. The room had no mirror. That felt right. I wasn't sure I needed to see myself just yet. The window faced west, and the wood floor gave slightly under my steps, with a long crack stretching from the door to the corner where the wall met the radiator. It clicked when it cooled. Not loud, just enough to remind me I wasn't home. I placed the teapot on a narrow table near the window. Its handle had a fine hairline fracture. Years ago, Daniel knocked it over while running through the kitchen. I glued it back together and never mentioned it. Hallie once laughed when she saw me using it. "You still keep that chipped thing," she said, picking it up like it might crumble. "You do get attached to broken things." She set it down without waiting for a response. The crack caught the light now, a thin gleam in the fading sun. There was a bookshelf half the height of the window. I laid the books down one by one. I didn't alphabetize them. I placed the one with the torn dust jacket Eudora Welty's collected stories on top. I'd read the first paragraph of Why I Live at the P.O. more times than I could count. I didn't feel like reading it now, but it needed to be there. That first night I sat on the edge of the bed without undressing. I listened. There was a woman humming in the room next door. The notes were off-key quiet, almost apologetic. I didn't recognize the tune. Somewhere down the hallway, water ran through old pipes, followed by the thud of a door that didn't close all the way. No one asked where I'd been. No one offered to show me around, and that oddly was enough. I placed the folded scarf beside the pillow. The ceramic teapot stayed wrapped until morning. The second day, I walked to the corner store for milk. The man behind the counter wore gloves with the fingertips cut off and didn't look up when I placed the carton down. "That it?" he mumbled. I nodded and handed him the exact change. On the way back, I saw a bench with peeling paint across from a laundromat. A young woman sat on it feeding crackers to a toddler in a lion-eared hoodie. The child sneezed, and she wiped his nose with the sleeve of her coat. Her movements were quick practiced. "Your son's lucky," I said, not expecting a reply. She glanced at me for the first time. No, I'm the lucky one. Then she turned back toward the child and didn't speak again. In my room, I boiled water in the old kettle. The plug sparked slightly in the socket. I poured the water slowly over the leaves, watching the steam rise and disappear. There was no sugar, no honey. I drank it plain. The bitterness grounded me. Later that evening, a woman in her 60s knocked lightly on my door and left a folded towel on the doorknob. Nothing else. I didn't open the door. I sat still until her footsteps faded down the corridor. I opened my suitcase, took out a pair of wool socks, and held them in my lap. They were a gift from Richard on our last Christmas. I had given him cufflinks shaped like tiny books. He never wore them. I never asked why. On the third day, I dusted the bookshelf with an old cloth I found tucked inside the closet. There was no vacuum, no broom, but the cloth picked up enough. I wiped down the windowsill, careful around the dead fly caught in the corner. Someone down the hall was frying onions. The smell crept in under the door, strong and familiar. It reminded me of Sunday dinners. Richard carving roast Hallie on her phone, even when I asked her to put it away. Daniel half listening to everyone and nodding as though he were already somewhere else. I remembered the last meal we had together. Daniel had looked up briefly between bites and said, "You know Hallie's doing the kind of work you never quite pulled off. She's sharper, more strategic." Hallie didn't even blink. "She means well," she added. I excused myself before dessert and washed the dishes alone. The air in the room now was still, clean in its silence. I sat down with a pad of paper and wrote one sentence, "There's nothing I forgot." Only things no one noticed I remembered. I folded the paper and placed it inside the teapot. The fourth day, I found a dry cleaner slip in the pocket of my coat. It was faded, dated 5 months ago. I couldn't remember what item it had been for. A blouse, maybe. One of the silk ones Hallie called old-fashioned. "Why don't you donate those already?" she said, once handing me a bag. "Someone out there might still think they're stylish." I had smiled and nodded. Now I traced the slip with my thumb and tore it into 4 pieces. I flushed them one by one. By the 5th day, I had memorized the rhythm of the elevator. It clanged once before arriving. If I timed it right, I could step out before the woman from down the hall came in with her dog, a miniature collie. She never said hello. I watched the dog more than I watched her. It never barked. It carried a yellow ball in its mouth and looked directly at the floor. Always the floor. That evening, I stood by the window as the sun dropped behind the brick building across the street. A man wheeled a suitcase down the sidewalk, the wheels catching on every uneven patch of concrete. I recognized the expression on his face. Not lost, just elsewhere. I didn't wave. I didn't move. I just let the day end. No one knocked. No one called my name. I poured the last of the tea and let it cool on the sill. The crack in the floor stretched just a little farther, and still it held. I used to think absence made people notice, that maybe if I stepped away, someone might finally look up and ask where I'd gone. They didn't. The message came on a Tuesday morning. No greeting, no warmth. Just, "Are you free this week? Daniel has a few questions about some older financial notes." Sent from Hallie's number. No punctuation at the end, just like always. I turned the phone over on the table. I didn't mute it. I didn't delete the message. I just let it sit there face down like something I wasn't obligated to carry anymore. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived. The address label had my name in full machine printed. Inside, an invitation to the Whitman Foundation's 30th anniversary gala. Gold lettering embossed on deep blue cardstock. Beneath the date and venue, it read, "The founding family will be present to welcome guests." My name was nowhere on it. But tucked into the envelope was a smaller slip of paper, not handwritten, just another typed note. "We think you should be there for the family image. Press will be attending." I held that note in one hand and the invitation in the other. I stared at them for a while, then slid them both back into the envelope and placed it under a book. I didn't shred it. I didn't throw it out. I just didn't want it looking at me. The call came a week after that. I knew the number before it finished ringing. I let it buzz twice, then picked up. Daniel's voice wasn't the one I remembered. Not the little boy who used to hum off key in the back seat on the way to piano lessons. This voice was tempered, smooth-edged, the way corporate men speak when they've practiced their tone to sound measured. "We all hope you'll attend the gala. Even if you're not involved in the day-to-day anymore, it would mean something, publicly." I waited for the rest. It came after a breath. "Hallie thought it might be good for appearances. Reporters ask about you sometimes." I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "Have you ever wondered why I'm not there?" He didn't answer right away. I imagined him in his office, seated upright in some leather-backed chair, staring at a screen with my name in an archived email. When he finally spoke, the voice was smaller, not uncertain, just rehearsed in a different key. "Hallie said you needed rest." Rest. That word again. They had turned it into a polite way of saying, "Removed." I ended the call by not replying. He would take the silence as consent or confusion. Either would serve their purpose. That evening, I brewed tea using the chipped porcelain cup I'd brought from the house. It had a small crack in the handle, one I never bothered to fix. It held just enough. I sat by the window with the mug in my hand, watching nothing in particular. Below, a woman was coaxing her dog to step off the curb. Across the street, someone folded laundry on their fire escape sheets, flapping like surrender flags. The cup left a faint ring on the windowsill. I didn't wipe it away. I just watched it dry. Later, I opened the drawer where I kept letters I never sent. Some had full pages. Others just a line or two. The one on top read, "You used my name until it no longer added value." I didn't remember writing it. The mail slot clinked in the hallway. I didn't move to check. It was probably another invitation, another envelope addressed in font too clean to hold any real regard. The following morning, my neighbor in the unit across the hall knocked lightly. "Hey, there's a package for you. Left at my door by mistake." I took it with a nod. Inside was a framed photo, me, Richard Daniel, taken years ago, maybe 2 decades back, before Hallie, before boardrooms and bylaws and press releases about legacy. A yellow sticky note was affixed to the glass. "Found this in storage. Thought you might want it for the display." No signature. I didn't put it up. I didn't return it either. Instead, I wrapped it in one of the scarves I no longer wore and placed it on the shelf beside the books I'd reread more than once. Later that week, a card arrived from the Foundation's media liaison. "We'll need a short quote from you for the program." Something warm, but brief. I didn't respond. Not because I couldn't find the words, but because they already had too many of mine. In minutes, in speeches, in signed documents. They had folded me into footnotes, framed me in headlines, and placed me at the end of thank you lists I never approved. I spent that night organizing old keys. One still had the label "Boardroom," RW etched on a piece of faded masking tape. I pressed the teeth of the key into the side of my thumb just to feel the ridges. Then I dropped it into a small tin and shut the lid. Daniel sent one final message. "We're setting up the slideshow for the gala. Would be nice to include a photo of you from the early years." No question mark, just an expectation. I let that message fade into the rest. When I finished the last of my tea, the leaf stain at the bottom looked like a bird mid-flight. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't take a photo. I didn't write back. I just stood up, folded the empty envelope from the Foundation in half, and placed it at the back of a drawer I no longer opened. and that too was an answer. I used to wait for the kettle to whistle. Now I watch the steam rise before it gets there. I didn't return, not even when the text said, "Just stop by, even for 10 minutes. I deleted it. Not out of anger. It simply didn't belong to my day anymore. I had other things scheduled. The Wednesday handcraft class, for one. Martha, who teaches it, wears the same denim apron every week and brings lemon candy in a glass jar. We don't talk much. She nods when she sees me threading wire through fabric, and I nod back. I made a small wall hanging last week, blue silk stitched with brass thread in the shape of branches. I didn't hang it. I folded it into a wooden box lined with felt. That box now sits on my bookshelf beside a stack of field notebooks I started keeping again. Nothing fancy, dates thoughts, diagrams of old plans that only I still remember. At the market, the flower girl with chipped nail polish greets me like a regular. I pick white daisies. They don't remind me of anyone. That's why I choose them. I bought a pair of walking shoes without asking if they'd match anything, just comfortable ones. I leave them by the door and wear them down one block and back before the sun sets. There's a cracked step near the alley where the concrete has turned pinkish from years of rain. I pause there every time, not to rest, but to listen. Someone always hums from an open window nearby. Off-key, but human. One evening, a woman in the laundromat asked if I'd dropped a coin. I looked at the quarter in her palm, worn almost smooth. "It's not mine," I said, but I kept thinking about it all the way home. I started organizing my old records, not for anyone else, just to see them in order again. Not the legal ones, the personal ones. Notes from the early grant meetings. Photos of the second office before we had plaques or a name on the glass. I even found the schedule Richard and I once scribbled on a napkin during a road trip. His handwriting leaned too far right, mine straight down like fence posts. I scanned the napkin and saved it on a flash drive. Then I placed the original inside a small envelope and sealed it without labeling. The dreams came slowly at first. One where Hallie stands in front of a locked gate, her mouth moving, but I can't hear a thing. Another where Daniel holds a key, but looks away when I reach out my hand. But the only one I remember fully is Richard standing under the fluorescent light of a hospital hallway. His tie is askew, his hand resting on a clipboard. "You should keep what's yours." I woke without the need to interpret it. Not everything must be understood. Some things simply arrive. That morning, I called Peter Langford. I hadn't spoken to him since Richard's funeral. I half expected his assistant to say he'd retired. Still here, his voice came dry as paper. I told him I had some questions. About the fund, no. About my name. He didn't ask for details. He set an appointment. I gathered the documents, originals, copies, the signed ledger with the first investment. The ink had faded, but the numbers were still there. I placed them in a plain folder. Not a leather briefcase, just a folder from the dollar store with a frayed edge. I included a handwritten timeline I'd built from memory, cross-referenced against my old receipts and emails. Not for proof, for precision. The woman at the UPS store offered to bind it for free. "You organized all this yourself?" she asked, glancing at the pages. I nodded. "That's rare," she added without looking up again. That evening, I watered the small succulent someone had left in the shared hallway. No one claimed it. I trimmed the brown tips, wiped the ceramic pot, and returned it to the windowsill. The window faced west. It caught the last light. A voice message came the next morning. Hallie's tone was smooth, practiced. "I heard from Daniel that you've been distant. We're hoping you'll come to the gala. You don't have to make a speech or anything, just a few photos." I replayed it once. Not for the message, but to hear how she pronounced "we're." It sounded like a company slogan. That afternoon, I found the navy dress I used to wear to board meetings. I turned it inside out and saw the label had come loose. I stitched it back by hand, not because I planned to wear it again, but because I didn't like seeing it unravel. I took out an old glass perfume bottle. The scent had thickened. I uncapped it anyway and let it sit near the window. Not to use, just to release what remained. The silence now feels less like absence and more like a room I can walk around in. Daniel texted again. Hallie says it's important we show unity. People notice, especially the media. No question mark, no please. Just the word unity typed in bold. I turned off the phone. Then I picked up the envelope with the flash drive, the one with Richard's napkin, my notes, the photos no one asked for. I wrapped it in brown paper and addressed it to a P.O. box I opened in my name alone. I didn't write a return address. There's a kind of relief in not waiting for a response. Some stories don't need to be corrected. They just need to be remembered in silence by the one who lived them. I've stopped rereading old emails. There's nothing left in them but timestamps and sentences that don't belong to me anymore. I met Peter at the cafe near the law school, the one with worn wooden tables and the smell of burnt espresso grounds that never really leaves your coat. He arrived on time as he always did when things truly mattered. I brought a folder worn at the corners. Inside were copies of the original funding documents, my notes in blue ink. Richard's signature beneath mine, the early draft bylaws with handwritten edits in the margins still visible under faded pencil lines. He placed his hand lightly over mine and waited. I didn't give a speech. I simply slid the folder across the table. A notepad Richard once used, still bearing his initials in gold emboss, lay tucked between the documents. I'm not asking for a battle. I just want what was true to stay true. Peter nodded once. His silence was an answer, not a pause. The next few days passed without headlines or thunder, just the soft tick of ordinary time. Then 3 days later, my phone lit up with his name. The Heritage Council accepted the documentation. They'll preserve it in the Founders Archive as a supplemental record. It won't reverse what's public, but it will exist in a place that matters. I didn't thank him. I didn't have to. He knew this wasn't about gratitude. That afternoon, I took the key from my drawer, the old brass one with Richard's initials etched faintly at the base, and placed it in a small envelope. I folded a copy of the original photo, too. The one from the first donor luncheon before they cropped me out for the website redesign. In it, I stood next to Richard, holding the microphone, his hand resting on my shoulder. You could see the corner of my lapel pin, the one that read, "Built from Hope." I wrote 3 lines on a note card in my handwriting that had grown steadier the less I tried to impress anyone. Hallie, I'm not coming back. I also don't need to explain. No return address. No postmark worth noting. I sealed the envelope and dropped it into the mailbox down the street, the one that creaked when pulled. Later that evening, I brought out the small wooden box where I kept the few things that had followed me into this newer life. I added a fresh item to the box, a single tea bag wrapped in wax paper, the kind I now use when I drink tea alone. No inscription, no meaning to anyone else, just something I chose and kept. A week passed, then 2. There was no response from Hallie. No message, no card, not even one of her usual formal emails signed respectfully. But Daniel called. Not to apologize. Martha from legal mentioned something about an archival supplement. Is that something you initiated? I didn't answer right away. I thought it might help preserve the record, I said, carefully folding the laundry one shirt at a time. I see. Hallie said it complicates things for the Foundation's rebranding. There are legacy names being questioned now. The word legacy caught somewhere between his molars, like a seed he couldn't swallow. I thought the Foundation was about preservation, I said, more to the folded shirt than to him. Well, things evolve, Mom. That's just the reality. There was a pause then, something that sounded almost like discomfort. Hallie thinks this might be your way of retaliating, but I told her that's not your style. I didn't correct him. Retaliation requires anger. What I'd done came from a quieter place, a steadier one. Anyway, he added, I thought you should hear it from me before someone else spins it. I didn't respond. I set down the shirt and looked at the window. Dust had gathered at the corners of the sill, catching late afternoon light like soft frost. Take care, Mom. The line went silent after that. No love you, no drawn-out goodbye. Just the kind of call made out of obligation, like signing a form you didn't read. I stood for a long time by the window, watching a man below struggle with an umbrella against a reluctant wind. His coat was too thin for the weather. Still, he walked forward. That night, I opened the archive confirmation email from Peter again. The attached PDF was short. Just an official notice of acceptance, the document title bearing my full name. No edits. No abbreviations. Just the truth held quietly between institutional lines. I printed a copy and tucked it between the pages of a novel I had once intended to read with Richard. It stayed unread, but not unopened. Some days later, a package arrived at the front desk. No sender listed. Inside, a single frame with a revised gala poster, the one that had once excluded my name. Now it had a new caption at the bottom, small but clear. In memory of both founders, Richard and... They had written my name. No title, no role, just the name. I didn't hang it. I wrapped it again in its paper and placed it behind the tea tins in the cabinet. It didn't need to be seen to be real. In the evening, I made tea again this time, letting the water sit longer than usual. The steam curled against the light, forming shapes no one else would notice. I sat down. Didn't write. Didn't call. Didn't plan the next step. The photograph remained in the envelope. The brass key stayed gone. Some things don't require return, and some truths, once written in the margin, are finally enough just being there. I don't need a reason anymore. I reached for the kettle, the same white ceramic one I'd wrapped in a wool scarf the day I left. The handle has a fine hairline crack, nearly invisible, unless the light hits just right. I still use it. The steam curls slowly upward, not rushing, not announcing itself. I poured water over the plain tea leaves I bought in bulk. Nothing imported, nothing delicate, just something warm, steady. The cup I chose has a chip at the rim. I turn the chip away from my mouth each time I drink, but I never think of replacing it. It holds the heat longer than the others. There's a ring on my finger that no longer fits snug. My knuckles have shifted over the years, but I never had it resized. The underside has an old engraving mostly worn away. I know what it once said. That's enough. I sat by the window and watched the movement of branches in the breeze. There's no need to name the season. The sun does what it always does. It rises, it softens, it sets. Shadows crawl across the floor in long ribbons that never ask to be noticed. I notice anyway. Inside the drawer of my desk beneath a folded cloth, there's a wooden box. I opened it without hesitation. Inside, a sheet of yellowing paper. Richard's handwriting had thinned in his final years. The ink now faded to a silvery blue, spelled my name with care. Nothing in this exists without her. That's all it said. No title, no flourish. Just that one sentence written in the margin of a meeting agenda now long irrelevant. I closed the lid again. I didn't make a copy. I didn't photograph it. Some things are clearer in memory than on paper. I stepped onto the porch where I'd placed a chair I had stained myself. It had taken me 3 afternoons. The grain wasn't even and the varnish bubbled in places, but it held. I kept a soft cushion on it, not new, but firm. On my lap, a notebook. Not for appointments, not for plans. Only a list I've kept since I moved. The smell of tea steam in early light. The hum of the old radiator at night. A neighbor's dog tapping past my door, crumbs on the counter after toasting bread. The faint imprint of my palm on the pillow each morning. None of these things require validation. No one reviews them, stamps them, files them under shared accounts. A few weeks ago, a courier arrived with a padded envelope. No name on the return address. Inside a copy of the gala brochure. Glossy paper, embossed titles, gold ink. A smiling group photograph. Daniel stood beside Hallie. Her hand rested just lightly on his shoulder. At the far right edge, blurred by a motioned hand, I could see my own shape just out of focus. Cropped. Present, but not acknowledged. A sticky note had been slipped inside. One sentence in blocky handwriting I recognized. You should have been proud of what we built. I folded the note in half, then again, and placed it between the pages of my notebook. Not out of nostalgia, just to keep it from the wind. Last Sunday, the bakery down the street gave away loaves at closing. I walked in just as the last rye loaf was being wrapped. The girl behind the counter smiled and handed it to me with both hands. Someone didn't show up for their order, she said, her voice light. I nodded. I took it. At home, I didn't slice it for company or place it on a serving tray. I tore off a corner and dipped it in olive oil, standing at the counter in my socks. The floor beneath my feet creaked in a familiar way. I'd marked the spot months ago by leaving the leg of a stool just slightly askew. Now I avoid it out of habit, though I no longer mind the sound. There's no mail I wait for, no calls I expect. The phone buzzes sometimes, but never with my name in the greeting. Often it's automated, or wrong numbers, or a name I recognize from a time when I used to RSVP. The last message I opened came from a shared group chain. Wedding photos. A caption. 4 generations in one frame, I looked closely. 3 generations smiled for the camera. The 4th me had taken the picture. I powered the phone off. Not because I was upset, just because I was done with the screen. This morning, I ironed a shirt I hadn't worn in years. The fabric is softer now, the collar less sharp. There's a thread loose near the hem. I didn't trim it. I hung the shirt near the window, let the light find it. The wrinkles eased slowly. Not all the way, but enough. I'm still here. Not hidden, not erased. And I no longer need to prove I ever was.